Hi, everybody. Hey, chapter 5, okay, internal commands to deal with things like copy and type. Copy and type. So let me go ahead and share my screen a little bit here. Here we go. Okay. And then let me go ahead and relaunch my CMD. And let me reacquire that. Share the screen. There we go. And then I can go ahead and maximize that screen, okay? So copy command, right? COPY / give some help. What is a copy command used for? To copy one or more files or folders to another location, okay? And again, you're really gonna start playing heavily with that student activities disk, and as you do, and you mess it up or whatever, because you're making changes to it, every so often it's gonna say, hey, reload the original starting structure from your WUG-XP. Again, what is your WUG-XP? That is your original zip disk. So it says, hey, delete everything that's on your USB stick now, all the files and folders, gone, okay? And then recopy that zip folder that has all of the subfolders and data files that you did back here in the beginning of week 2, okay? And this way you have a brand new starting point and everybody gets to start from the same position. And even though I use the commands to delete stuff, you can't delete my zip folder, okay? You can only delete what's on your USB stick. Again, cleaning it out like an Etch-a-Sketch to start it over and over again, okay? So a copy command, basically the copy command has 3 parts to it. It's copy, space, the original file or the file name, space, the new file name. And everything else after that and stuff really just simply is switches just to make that kind of happen more frequently and stuff, okay? The copy command is internal, which means it gets loaded into memory every single time the computer's turned on, okay? And so that's kind of a, a helpful way because you don't have to load it as an external program, okay? And so, the copy command is always with you, okay? So if I said again, let me go to drive I:, and I said, let me do a directory. Fantastic. Hey, look, I still got those CIT40 and CIT50, okay? Remember what we did before? We had the state.cap, and in chapter 4, I did a kind of just a quick little move. Well, this time I'm going to try it by using a copy. I'm going to say copy space I:/ state.cap to I:/ CIT40 / state.cap. And so it says, hey, one file copied. Now if I do a directory of / CIT40, hey, there's a file in there, state cap. And if I do a regular directory, right, of the state cap is still in its original location. Again, I see state.cap up here in its original location, and a copy of it has now been put in the CIT folder with the same file and size name, right, size and everything, okay? Same date, timestamp, whatever, in that world and stuff. So I think, in that realm and stuff, it gives us an idea of the copy command. So it's a copy space, the path, the file name, the original path, the original file name of its original location, and then space, the path, and the file name of the new location, okay? So again, I can copy it from one place to another. And, chapter 5 will spend, 20 pages on the copy command with all these screen captures and stuff. And that's fine. The book is, like I said, this book is kind of wordy in terms of, it's kind of big and thick, mainly because it's got a lot of screen captures to show you results of the commands, okay? But let's distill it down to the really basics. A copy command says I want to make a duplicate and I got to be able to move and copy things around, okay? So if I want a copy of the music folder that's in the root directory of drive I, and I want a whole copy of that, so let's say that music folder was my bootleg music, I would say copy space I:/ music space, let's say I put I:/ let's say CIT50. And I really probably should put / music so it knows that the receiving copy should have the same folder, okay? Right? Now if I do a directory of / CIT, what did I say? I said CIT in the command, 50. Oops, nice if I not typo. Okay? I see that, oh, I have one file because when I did the copy a moment ago, it copied all of those files into one file called music. Oh, yeah, I don't want to do that. I want to say this instead. I want to say copy the music folder into the folder called CIT40. Now, it looks like it's doing the same thing, okay? But we're going to see if the end results is a folder in CIT40. Oh, there you go. Yep. You know, all of these files were copied into the root directory, because that's what I said with the command, the root directory of 50. So if we look at the command itself, I didn't, when I said copy it, okay, when I said copy the file, there we go. Right, what did I do here? Let's see, dir here. Okay. I'm going to have the copy of all these files. Okay, here it is. Copy /music to /CIT40. And so they've got all these folder files or whatever are going to be put in here. Okay. Now, what if CIT 50 already had a folder called music? Well, let me go into CIT 50's folder real quick. CD /CIT 50 to a directory. Oh, I see a bunch of stuff. And what if I want to get rid of all those files and folders, no matter what they're called, whatever? So I'm going to say del space star dot star. Any file name, any extension. And it's like, are you sure? Sure, yeah. Give it a second here. There you go. Now if I do a directory, all these files are gone. I'm not worried about it because I did a delete off of my drive I in a CIT40 folder. Again, if I were to screw up my drive I would just go back and delete everything that's on my USB stick, copy my zip back over, and then I'm off in the same starting point, okay? So let's say that over here, I put a make directory on the CIT40 of music. So now, okay, okay, so let's see, md /CIT40 /music. Okay, so now I have a subfolder called music waiting for my information. So now if I go back, I'll use my history command, my up arrow, and I'll say, hey, I want to copy, what is that copy one? Okay, I said copy the music off the root directory, not to the CIT40 directory, but to the CIT40 directory in music. So the subdirectory music, because that now exists out there. It didn't exist before, which is why I took all those files and put it into one file name. Now that folder really does exist. Okay. Okay. And now if I look at the directory, it looks like nothing happened. I do see this music directory, but now if I say change to the CIT40 /music, that'd be nice if I could spell this right, and then do a directory, there they all are, okay? So in that world, okay, I have copied all of those, not moved, but copied them from my root directory of drive subdirectory called music to my, not my root directory of CIT40, but my CIT40 subdirectory and the music directory underneath of it. And so I have an exact transfer over there. And the big difference is that I had a music folder waiting for me, okay, with the MD command. So that should help you a little bit when you're playing around with the copy command. Again, if you play with the drive I and you mess it up, okay, do like the Etch-a-Sketch, delete everything in your drive I, okay? So if I go back here to my drive I, my root directory, and you know, I can remove the CIT40 and the CIT40. Now they have some stuff in it, so I'm going to say rd /CIT40 space /s, which means, hey, I want to get rid of it. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. Now when I do a directory, CIT40 is gone. Okay. Now I could have done it the other way. rd /s space /CIT40. We'll try that one. So what's the big difference between putting the switch next to the command or putting the switch after the command? And the answer is, it doesn't make a difference to Microsoft as long as it can find the switch. I personally like this layout, where I put the switch right next to the command, and I said, hey, I want to remove a directory and any subdirectories or any contents that have it of the CIT40 folder, okay? It says, you sure you want to do this? Yep. Great. Give it a second here. Fantastic. Now if I do a directory, I'll notice that my CIT40 and CIT50 are gone now, okay? So I've effectively been able to remove those two. Okay. The other thing in chapter 5 is the type command. The type command basically, well, let's see what it says. TYPE /?. It says what? Displays the contents of a text file or text files by the type command giving its drive and path location and the file name. Okay. So you remember that one that we called it was state.cap? Okay. Now I don't know what cap is, but I'm going to tell you because I do really know. It's a text file. Okay, but it didn't get assigned .txt like say this Venus one did. Okay, so I could say type I:\state.cap, and it's going to give me an answer, and that's the information. Oh, state capitals, got it. But if I have this one over here, right, that was called Venus.text, I could say type I:\Venus.txt. Oh, that's a little couple of paragraphs about the planet Venus. Okay, so I'm showing the contents of a file by using the type command, TYPE. Type followed by the name of the file or its path locations, give the full file name, whatever, and then it will then go ahead and display the contents of that text file. If I try to type the contents of a command file or an executable file, I typically get a bunch of funny characters going across the screen, sometimes a beeping sound, whatever, because it's a encrypted file. Okay, it's not just a plain text file like these two other ones that are here. Okay. So what's the type command for? It's to show you the contents of a text file, okay? So let's say that at work you keep track of everybody who works at the company in a file called personal file, okay? Here's one called personal.fil. I don't think I would probably have that as .fil. I think I would probably have it in a spreadsheet, or I'd have it in a Word doc or a database document, but anyway, this one's called personal.fil. So if I said, hey, what's the command? TYPE, type personal.fil. And now all of a sudden I see a list of people who work for that particular company. Okay. Now, because type is also an internal command, it didn't require any other program. If I had this file and it was in Word, okay, or it was in Excel or Access, or it was in Pages or whatever, it would require me to have that program so I can see the contents of it. So text files are kind of the great equalizer. If you can put something into a text format, okay, then you don't need the software program. You just need the operating system to see the text format. So for instance, let's say that you go on an airplane flight. Well, when everybody on board that plane, there's going to be what's called the manifest, a list of every passenger, every crew member, pilot, engineers, whatever, in that manifest, okay? And it's probably going to be created using some fancy airline software, okay? But they got to send a copy of that manifest to Homeland Security before that plane takes off. So this way Homeland Security knows exactly who is on that airplane before that thing leaves the ground, okay? Well, you don't want to send it in the fancy airline software, because that requires Homeland Security to also have that particular software. You want to send it as a text file, like what you see here in front of you here, that can be opened up by pretty much any operating system that's out there, okay, by something as simple as the type command. Type command, again, happens to be a Microsoft command and stuff, okay? You know, there are other commands and other OSs, but the point being, it's a plain text file that is readable, okay, by other operating systems just in its basic elements, and doesn't require any sophisticated software program to go with it, okay? Type is an internal command. Copy is an internal command. You can look out on the web. I think I gave you a link to a website called EasyDOS, EASYDOS.com. And in the EasyDOS.com website and stuff, you can go to what's called the index, and it'll show you an index of a whole bunch of commands in Microsoft. And the first thing it'll tell you in the command is it internal or external When did it become available? So is that a DOS version, whatever, you know, for DOS 6, or was it part of way back to DOS 2.01 or 1.0 or something like that? And then it tells you if it's internal or external. Again, what's the big difference between internal and external? Internals get loaded into memory every time the computer turns on. It doesn't require any of the resources. It's been loaded into the computer's RAM, into its memory. External has to be executed, which means it has to load into the program, into the memory, and then execute it. And then you decide whether or not you want to use that. So for instance, format is an external command. It's not loaded into memory every time. Why? Because it's not one of those base commands you probably do every day. DIR might be something you would do every day, but do you format your hard drive every day? No, probably not. Okay, do you want to see what's on your hard drive every day? Sure. So having the internal command makes it more convenient, doesn't require any additional resources. Okay, so a little bit of difference there between internal and external. Again, in this chapter 5, whatever, you know, you're going to talk about, you're going to learn about copy, the various uses of the copy command and the type command, and you're going to play back around with it. So I hope that kind of helps you a bit. Let me go ahead and stop my recording, and you guys have a great day.